Ukraine is wiping Russian positions off the map in Donetsk, raising its flag once again over ground in Zaporizhzhia, and unleashing what may be its largest coordinated counteroffensive yet near the borderlands of Dnipropetrovsk. At the frozen intersection of Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Dnipropetrovsk regions, a new and volatile front line has erupted into full intensity. Russian troops, battered by relentless Ukrainian drone surveillance and brutal winter exposure, are reportedly surrendering in growing numbers simply to escape the cold and isolation. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces, hardened and determined, are not only halting Russian advances toward Dnipropetrovsk's borders, but reversing them with synchronized assaults that have stunned Moscow's command structure. What began as fierce clashes near the Oleksandrivka sector rapidly expanded across the entire axis. Russian units had prepared one of their largest operations of the year here, expecting momentum. Instead, they encountered a counterstrike timed with precision. Ukrainian brigades are holding defensive lines while simultaneously pushing forward in layered counteroffensive waves, disrupting logistics and fragmenting Russian formations. Intercepted communications reveal the depth of Russian disarray. In one transmission reportedly captured by Ukrainian intelligence, a Russian officer's voice trembled as contact faded. He claimed they had been forgotten, surrounded entirely by Ukrainian drones, cut off and disoriented. Whether symbolic or literal, the message reflects a broader collapse in coordination. Units that believed they were advancing now find themselves exposed, undersupplied, and uncertain of command directives. The psychological effect is becoming as damaging as battlefield losses. Fear, confusion, and communication breakdowns have fueled the ignition point of Ukraine's latest push. Even prominent Russian military bloggers have begun acknowledging the severity of the situation. Channels such as Rybar concede that exaggerated victory reports from higher command created a false perception of control. Settlements previously declared captured were never fully secured. Defensive lines celebrated in state media proved fragile under renewed Ukrainian pressure. Now, Ukrainian forces are advancing from areas once portrayed as Russian triumphs, flipping the narrative and destabilizing morale. This reversal has reportedly generated alarm within the Kremlin, not merely because of territorial setbacks, but because it exposes systemic misinformation within Russia's war reporting apparatus. Each retreating Russian unit, each abandoned trench, adds to a widening credibility gap between propaganda and battlefield reality. The Ukrainian strategy appears aimed not only at reclaiming ground, but dismantling the illusion of inevitability surrounding Moscow's campaign. As coordinated strikes intensify across this tri-regional junction, the operational tempo suggests careful preparation rather than spontaneous reaction. Ukrainian Defense Forces representatives state clearly that the strategy is no longer limited to absorbing assaults. When Russian troops attack, Ukrainian forces hold. But holding is no longer the objective. They are striking back, exploiting weak points, and expanding tactical pressure along multiple sectors simultaneously. The battlefield dynamic has shifted from defensive endurance to calculated momentum, and in this frozen corridor where three regions converge, the hottest front of the war is now unfolding with consequences that could reshape the wider campaign. Russia entered 2026 with a bold objective. Its command believed that by concentrating forces near the junction of Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions, it could force a decisive breakthrough. The immediate target was the village of Pokrovsky, but the deeper ambition was far greater. By pushing Ukrainian defenders away and seizing ground near the administrative borders of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, Moscow hoped to fracture Ukraine's defensive belt and create a launch corridor towards Zaporizhzhia city. Elite formations were quietly redeployed. Logistics were reinforced. Months of preparation went into what Russian planners described internally as the most significant operation of the year. Yet the offensive that was meant to reshape the front instead triggered one of the most forceful Ukrainian counterblows in recent months. Rather than waiting passively, Ukrainian air assault forces announced active operations along the Oleksandrivka axis. The message was clear. The objective was not merely to contain Russian advances, but to dismantle them. Ukrainian units began applying pressure across a broad arc, estimated at nearly 20 kilometers. This was not a localized clash, but a coordinated and systematic campaign. Drone reconnaissance saturated Russian positions, identifying artillery sites, supply nodes, and troop concentrations. Under this aerial umbrella, infantry units advanced methodically, exploiting weak points created by constant strikes. Each day brought incremental territorial gains. Each day, Russian defensive cohesion weakened. The broader aim extended beyond battlefield geometry. Kiev sought to prevent any Russian penetration toward Dnipropetrovsk while simultaneously degrading offensive groupings poised for deeper thrusts into Zaporizhzhia. Reports from British defense intelligence indicated that Ukrainian counteroffensive actions near Huliaipol resulted in the recapture of over 100 square kilometers. Gains around settlements southeast of the front line disrupted Russian eastward assault preparations aimed at Orikhiv, a fortified logistics hub critical to central Zaporizhzhia's defense network. By forcing Russian units onto the defensive, Ukraine altered the operational tempo. What Moscow envisioned as a year-opening surge became a struggle to retain previously claimed positions. Compounding Russia's difficulties were disruptions in battlefield communications. Ukrainian strikes reportedly targeted technical infrastructure supporting Russian coordination, generating confusion within frontline units. Loss of stable communications undermined artillery synchronization and delayed reinforcements. In modern warfare, superiority in information flow can determine outcomes as decisively as firepower. By challenging that advantage, Ukraine transformed tactical engagements into strategic leverage. Meanwhile, Russian official statements painted a dramatically different picture. Lieutenant General Sergei Rudskoy declared that hundreds of square kilometers and dozens of settlements had fallen under Russian control since the beginning of the year. He cited extensive territorial gains in eastern Zaporizhzhia and southern Dnipropetrovsk regions. However, assessments from the Institute for the Study of War contradicted these assertions. Independent analysis suggested significantly smaller advances with fewer settlements captured and considerably less territory secured than claimed. The disparity was stark. Where Moscow reported sweeping victories, evidence indicated marginal progress achieved at substantial cost. The contrast between proclamation and battlefield reality is reshaping perceptions. Ukraine's counteroffensive momentum has not only challenged Russian troop movements, but also exposed fractures within the narrative of inevitable advance. Every reclaimed field and contested village weakens the image of unstoppable force carefully cultivated by the Kremlin. As Ukrainian units continue coordinated assaults across this volatile frontier, the strategic objective remains firm. Shield Dnipropetrovsk, stabilize Zaporizhzhia, and convert Russian overreach into operational setback. The confrontation unfolding across these snowy plains is no longer defined by who attacks first, but by who adapts faster under pressure. Even more damaging than territorial reversals is the widening credibility gap surrounding Russian claims of success. Official briefings continue to describe sweeping offensives and decisive control over key settlements, yet independent battlefield assessments tell another story. The Institute for the Study of War documented that since the start of 2026, Russian forces captured far fewer settlements and significantly less territory than publicly announced. In some sectors of eastern Zaporizhzhia, only limited ground changed hands, while Ukrainian units simultaneously recaptured substantial areas and liberated multiple communities in western parts of the region. The difference between declared victories and verified outcomes is no minor discrepancy. It reveals a systemic pattern of inflated reporting that now carries strategic consequences. One of Russia's prominent military bloggers, Mikhail Zvinchuk, known for the Rybar channel, openly acknowledged the growing crisis. He admitted that repeated declarations of captured villages often masked the inability of troops to consolidate positions. According to his remarks, Ukrainian forces are now launching attacks from territories previously celebrated as Russian triumphs. This admission sent ripples through pro-war circles because it confirmed what many frontline soldiers had quietly experienced. Reports of success were moving upward through command structures, while conditions on the ground remained fragile, contested, and costly. The roots of this pattern extend deep into institutional culture. Commanders reluctant to report setbacks risk professional consequences, so optimistic summaries replace accurate evaluations. The result is a distorted operational picture reaching Moscow's highest levels. While speeches emphasize inevitability and momentum, soldiers in trenches confront harsh realities of supply shortages, extreme winter conditions, and relentless Ukrainian drone surveillance. The psychological strain grows heavier when official narratives no longer match lived experience. Historical parallels inevitably surface. During the Soviet campaign in Afghanistan, victory reports often obscured mounting losses and strategic stagnation. Only later did the scale of miscalculation become undeniable. Today, observers detect echoes of that era in the snow-covered expanses of southern Ukraine. Inflated success metrics cannot alter battlefield physics. Territory must be held, supplied, and defended under constant threat. When reports exaggerate gains, planning assumptions become flawed, and operational vulnerabilities multiply. Ukraine appears determined to exploit these fractures. Each incremental advance not only shifts frontline coordinates, but also deepens uncertainty within Russian ranks. Casualty statistics underscore the cost. Analysts estimate that previous yearly advances came at extraordinarily high human expense per square kilometer gained. Marginal territorial increments required sustained assaults against fortified defenses, draining manpower and material. Now, as Ukrainian counteroffensives intensify, the sustainability of that approach faces renewed scrutiny. The struggle at the crossroads of Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk has therefore become more than a contest for villages. It is a test of adaptability versus rigidity, transparency versus illusion. Ukraine's strategy blends defensive resilience with calibrated offensive thrusts, aiming to convert overstretched assaults into retreat. Russia's challenge is not solely tactical, but informational. When battlefield claims erode under verification, confidence within ranks and among supporters diminishes. As Ukrainian forces continue to press forward day by day, liberating pockets of territory and stabilizing threatened sectors, the larger narrative shifts. The question is no longer whether Russia can announce victories, but whether it can translate declarations into durable control. For now, the momentum suggests that every overstated report becomes another opportunity for Ukraine to advance one step further. Ukraine's counteroffensive has transformed the southern front from a frozen stalemate into a map that changes week by week. In mid-February, Ukrainian units reported a series of coordinated counterattacks near the administrative boundary between Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts. On February 10th, defensive formations confirmed successful advances that pushed Russian elements away from key approach routes. A day later, troops cleared the village of Kosiv in Zaporizhzhia Oblast, removing entrenched occupation forces and restoring Ukrainian control. By February 12th, independent battlefield assessments noted that Ukrainian defenders were exploiting communication breakdowns within Russian ranks, reportedly intensified by disruptions to Starlink and Telegram usage. These localized actions were not isolated thrusts, but components of a broader operational design aimed at compressing Russian footholds and widening reclaimed corridors. Pressure intensified over the following days. On February 18th, Southern Defense Forces spokesperson Volodymyr Velichko announced that Ukrainian units had reduced the so-called gray zone near the settlements of Vishniva, Verbova, and Turiv in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, pushing back Russian consolidation groups attempting to regroup. 4 days later, Ukrainian air assault forces declared that since the launch of operations along the Oleksandrivka axis, combined units had restored control over more than 300 square kilometers and cleared 8 settlements of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance detachments. President Volodymyr Zelensky publicly stated that approximately 300 square kilometers had been liberated in southern counteroffensive actions. Each announcement marked not just a tactical gain, but a psychological shift. Villages such as Stepov, Kosivska, Vishna, Verbov, and others saw the Ukrainian flag raised once again. For residents emerging from months of occupation, liberation meant more than lines on a map. It meant electricity returning, humanitarian convoys arriving, and the visible presence of their own soldiers walking through streets once patrolled by foreign troops. In abandoned trenches near Stepov, evidence of sudden withdrawal told its own story. Discarded uniforms lay stiff with frost. Shell casings littered firing positions. Half-eaten rations remained frozen where they had been dropped. Temperatures had plunged below minus 20 degrees Celsius, and supply shortages compounded the misery. For many Russian soldiers, survival appeared to eclipse mission objectives. Ukrainian footage showed surrendering troops receiving blankets and hot meals, scenes that underscored a stark contrast between frontline hardship and triumphant rhetoric broadcast from Moscow. Accounts from captured servicemen described months without rotation, inadequate winter gear, and thinning provisions. The physical environment showed no regard for official narratives. Cold, hunger, and isolation eroded cohesion more effectively than artillery in some sectors. Logistical strain has become increasingly visible. Ukrainian deep strikes targeting depots, rail junctions, and fuel storage facilities have complicated Russian resupply chains. Units positioned in exposed salients often operate with limited ammunition and dwindling fuel reserves. Observers note that the broader Russian advance throughout 2025 and early 2026 came at high human and material cost, and sustaining that tempo under intensified Ukrainian counterpressure has proven difficult. The cumulative effect is evident in defensive lines that yield incrementally under persistent assault. Ukraine's approach blends steady territorial reclamation with targeted disruption of infrastructure, magnifying the pressure on overstretched formations. What began as localized counterattacks has evolved into a sustained campaign that combines battlefield maneuver with strategic attrition, gradually altering the balance across the southern theater. As winter tightened its grip, the human dimension of the conflict became even more apparent. Night temperatures in some frontline sectors dropped to minus 25 degrees Celsius, trenches filled with snow and icy mud, turning defensive positions into punishing environments. Reports from the field indicated that many Russian soldiers lacked adequate winter uniforms, relying on thin coats, worn boots, and insufficient gloves. Firewood and fuel were scarce, and frozen water supplies added to daily hardship. Under such conditions, morale deteriorated rapidly. Soldiers huddled together for warmth, conserving energy rather than preparing for assault. Hunger replaced combat as the immediate concern when rations ran out and resupply failed to arrive. Ukrainian defense officials have documented increasing instances of surrender. On February 17th, the 158th Mechanized Brigade reported that 5 Russian soldiers surrendered on the northern Siversk-Lyman axis after initial contact was made through drone-delivered loudspeaker messages. 2 servicemen first approached Ukrainian lines, then persuaded 3 comrades to lay down their arms. According to Ukrainian officers, the prisoners were added to the exchange pool and provided medical assistance and shelter. Similar cases unfolded elsewhere. In Kupiansk, elements of the Ukrainian National Guard facilitated the surrender of 3 Russian soldiers after one contacted the state program I Want to Live via chatbot. Reconnaissance units coordinated a safe extraction despite reported fire from nearby Russian positions. The captured infantryman stated that he had served for extended periods without rotation and received minimal logistical support. These events illustrate a broader trend. The combination of relentless Ukrainian drone surveillance, logistical disruption, and extreme winter conditions has strained Russian frontline units. Analysts observe that when supply networks falter and communication lines weaken, isolated detachments become vulnerable not only to physical encirclement, but also to psychological collapse. Ukraine's systematic targeting of depots and transport corridors compounds these pressures, reducing the ability of commanders to stabilize threatened sectors. Each surrender, each abandoned trench, reflects the cumulative weight of attrition rather than a single dramatic breakthrough. Strategically, Ukraine's southern counteroffensive now functions on multiple levels. It reclaims territory, compresses enemy salients, and forces Moscow to divert reserves to plug emerging gaps. At the same time, it projects an image of momentum that contrasts sharply with Russian claims of steady expansion. Independent assessments have repeatedly highlighted discrepancies between official statements and verified territorial control, reinforcing skepticism among observers. In this environment, credibility becomes as significant as firepower. When declared victories fail to hold under scrutiny, confidence within command structures and among troops can erode. The situation across Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts thus represents more than a regional clash. It embodies the intersection of logistics, morale, and narrative. Ukrainian forces continue advancing incrementally, liberating settlements and shrinking contested zones. Russian units confronting supply shortages and environmental extremes face mounting pressure to maintain positions that offer diminishing strategic value. As winter persists and operations intensify, the pattern remains consistent. Ukraine moves forward step by step, while the cost of overstretched offensives weighs increasingly heavily on those ordered to sustain them. Ukraine's I Want to Live program has become more than a humanitarian channel. It is now a visible indicator of the shifting balance on the battlefield. Designed to offer Russian soldiers a secure and organized way to surrender, the initiative is reportedly drawing increasing numbers each week. As conditions at the front deteriorate and communication fractures widen, more servicemen are choosing survival over sacrifice. This development forces a deeper question. While Russian forces absorb losses across an extended front, what is unfolding within the higher command structure in Moscow? Reports of stalled offensives and reclaimed Ukrainian territory arrive daily, yet public messaging continues to insist that everything proceeds according to plan. Inside the Kremlin, tension is mounting. In Russian political tradition, battlefield failure rarely ends with quiet reassignment. Careers collapse abruptly, and in some cases, public visibility simply fades. As rumors circulate about instability within senior command positions, speculation intensifies over who may shoulder responsibility for setbacks. Yet amid whispered discussions in Moscow corridors, the voices of soldiers enduring freezing trenches remain distant. Ukraine's counteroffensive has not only altered frontline geometry, it has disrupted carefully prepared narratives. Propaganda broadcasts speak of steady advance, but field reports and independent assessments increasingly contradict those claims. On February 19th, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced the capture of a settlement in Zaporizhzhia. Ukrainian Southern Defense spokesperson Vladislav Voloshin publicly rejected the assertion, stating that the village remained under Ukrainian control and that counter-sabotage operations had neutralized attempted infiltrations. Such contradictions are no longer rare. They reflect a widening gap between declaration and verification. Even some Russian military bloggers now question official communiques, acknowledging that repeated announcements of captured villages often lack durable confirmation. Each exposed exaggeration compounds skepticism among observers and strains confidence within ranks. Communication breakdowns have amplified the problem. Ukrainian operations have reportedly capitalized on limitations affecting Russian digital coordination. Restrictions involving Starlink and Telegram usage disrupted information flow within certain sectors, leaving forward units with reduced situational awareness. In modern warfare, fragmented communication can paralyze artillery targeting, delay reinforcements, and isolate platoons under pressure. Intercepted radio exchanges describing absent orders and grounded drones underscore the operational cost of such disruption. When coordination falters, even well-armed formations struggle to maintain cohesion. Beyond the battlefield, economic strain deepens the challenge. Russian commentators have acknowledged tightening financial conditions. Interest rates climbed sharply, inflation accelerated, and consumer prices rose across major cities. Reports of restaurant closures and supply chain difficulties reflect the cumulative burden of prolonged conflict. As parliamentary elections approach, state media emphasis on party achievements has intensified, suggesting concern over shifting public sentiment. Analysts note that sustained military expenditure combined with sanctions pressure complicates fiscal stability. When household costs rise and opportunities narrow, public tolerance for extended campaigns may erode. Meanwhile, scenes from recently liberated villages tell a different story. In town squares once marked by occupation checkpoints, Ukrainian flags rise again. Residents gather, embrace returning soldiers, and begin restoring ordinary routines. These images carry symbolic weight. They demonstrate not only tactical success, but societal resilience. Ukraine's strategy integrates battlefield persistence with communication clarity, projecting momentum while countering opposing narratives. The recapture of hundreds of square kilometers in the south challenges assumptions embedded in official Russian maps and statements. Speculation now turns toward potential next phases. Some analysts suggest that sustained advances could pressure strategic nodes such as Pokrovsk, complicating Russian defensive planning. Whether this momentum expands further will depend on logistics, reserves, and adaptability on both sides. What is clear is that the informational dimension of the conflict has become inseparable from territorial control. Each surrendered soldier, each reclaimed settlement reverberates beyond its coordinates. In Moscow, awareness grows that setbacks cannot be indefinitely reframed without consequence. On the frozen steppes of Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk, the trajectory of the campaign continues to evolve, carrying implications not only for the front, but for the political and economic landscape behind it.